Hello, space explorers. Welcome back to Sci-Fi Space, the place where we dive into the most mind-blowing sci-fi stories in the universe. What if aliens thought humans were total weaklings until one guy blew their minds by fighting off a pack of monsters while bleeding out? In today's video, we're diving into an insane survival story on the deadly planet Zoran 9, where a human named Daniel Carter proves everyone wrong, with a twist you won't see coming. Stick around till the end to find out what makes him tick and drop a comment. Would you face down aliens like that? Don't forget to smash that subscribe button for Sci-Fi Space so you never miss a story like this. The Zarek Interstellar Academy was the crown jewel of galactic education, a place where the smartest minds from across the stars came to prove themselves. It didn't mess around. Every second-year student had to pass an off-world survival course, a grueling test that threw them into the deep end of hostile alien planets. This year, the Academy picked Zoran 9, a desert world known for its sandstorms and predators that could rip you apart before you even saw them coming. The official rating was moderate risk, scary enough to make most students sweat, but not enough to call off the program. For the group of 8 dropped onto its surface, it was sink or swim. Kaelar, a Zynari student, stepped off the transport shuttle with a mix of confidence and nerves. His 6 thin arms glowed faintly, a natural trait of his species, and his big round eyes scanned the horizon. He was a top-tier scholar, obsessed with intergalactic biology, and figured he could outsmart whatever Zoran 9 threw at him. That was until he noticed Daniel Carter, the only human in their team. Daniel didn't look like much. Skinny, no natural armor, just a guy in the Academy's basic fatigues with a backpack slung over one shoulder. No gas mask, no heat shield, nothing fancy. He walked like he was heading to a barbecue, not a death trap. Kaelar adjusted his protective suit, the straps digging into his shoulders, and shot Daniel a look. "You know the air here's got toxins, right? Not lethal right away, but it'll mess you up after a while." His tone had an edge, like he was daring Daniel to argue. Daniel just shrugged, grinning like it was no big deal. "I've sucked in worse back home. This stuff's not even that bad, no sulfur stink or anything." Kaelar blinked all at once, a Zynari tick that meant he wasn't buying it. "You're weird. Your kind's got soft skin, bones that snap like twigs. How are you acting like this is nothing?" Daniel laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the wind kicking up around them. "I've been through spots where you'd swear the ground was out to get you. This is just Tuesday." Kaelar shook his head, trying to wrap his mind around it. He'd read the files on humans: no claws, no venom, no regeneration. They were the weakest link in the galaxy's chain, yet Daniel stood there, cool as ice, like Zoran 9 was his playground. It didn't sit right with Kaelar. Something about that cocky attitude rubbed him raw, but he kept his mouth shut for now. The group started trudging toward their designated campsite, a spot picked out by the Academy to test their grit. Kaelar stuck close to his gear, triple-checking the seals on his suit, while Daniel kept pace without breaking a sweat. The Zynari couldn't let it go. He'd spent years studying species, ranking them by strength and survival odds, and humans always landed at the bottom. Fragile, vulnerable, done for the second something sharp came their way. But Daniel didn't fit that box. He didn't even seem to care about the stakes, and that bugged Kaelar more than he'd admit. "Look," Kaelar said, breaking the silence as they walked, "this isn't some field trip. Zoran 9's got predators that'll eat us alive if we screw up." Daniel glanced over, still grinning. "Yeah, I heard the briefing. Sounds fun." Kaelar's eyes narrowed. Fun? This guy was either clueless or insane, and neither option made sense. "You don't get it," he pressed. "Your body's not built for this. One wrong move, and you're toast." Daniel shrugged again, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Maybe. But I'm still here, aren't I?" That was it. Kaelar couldn't stand the casual vibe anymore. He turned away, focusing on the path ahead, but his mind was racing. Daniel wasn't just some outlier, he was a walking contradiction. Every fact Kaelar knew said humans should have died out ages ago, yet this one acted like the rules didn't apply. It wasn't just annoying, it was unsettling. The group kept moving, and Kaelar felt a knot tighten in his chest. He didn't know what was coming, but something told him Daniel Carter was going to turn everything he thought he knew upside down. The team reached their campsite, a flat patch of hard-packed sand circled by a few busted-up rocks. The wind was picking up, howling like it had a grudge, and Kaelar was already on edge. He fumbled with his gear, his 6 arms working overtime to secure the tent stakes against the gusts. Across from him, Daniel was hammering his own stakes into the ground with bare hands, no gloves, no nothing, just brute force and that same dumb grin. Kaelar couldn't take it. "You don't feel that heat," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut through the noise. "It's brutal out here." Daniel glanced up, wiping sweat off his forehead with the back of his hand. "Yeah, it's hot. I've dealt with worse, those suns so bad it'd fry your eyeballs." Kaelar's jaw tightened. He didn't buy it. His suit was top-notch, filtering out the toxins and keeping him cool, but he could still feel the burn seeping in. And here was Daniel, no tech, no protection, acting like it was a summer day. "You're full of it," Kaelar shot back. "No gear? You'll be dead by morning." Daniel just smirked, tying off a cord with a quick tug. "We'll see." That was it, 2 words, and Kaelar wanted to strangle him. The guy wasn't just clueless, he was cocky about it, like he was daring the planet to prove him wrong. Kaelar turned away, muttering under his breath about humans and their delusions, but the irritation stuck with him like sand in his boots. Then Instructor Torvak showed up, stomping over with all the grace of a tank. He was a Forkan, built like a slab of rock with skin that looked like it could shrug off a grenade. His voice rumbled low and rough, loud enough to make the team snap to attention. "Listen up. Zoran 9's no picnic. We've got Kraxons out there, nasty bastards with teeth like knives and speed that'll leave you in the dust. You're a team now. Keep this camp tight, and don't step outside the perimeter unless I say so. Got it?" A couple of students nodded fast, their eyes wide. Daniel just gave a quick yep, like he'd heard it all before. Kaelar couldn't hold back. He leaned toward Daniel, keeping his voice low but biting. "You're seriously not worried? Those things'll rip you apart." Daniel popped the last bite of a ration bar into his mouth, chewing slow before answering. "Worrying's not gonna stop them if they show up." Kaelar's hands twitched, one of his 6 arms nearly swung out on reflex. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," he hissed. "You're a walking target out here, no armor, no sense." Daniel stretched, leaning back like he was chilling at a bar. "Maybe. But panicking's not my style. If they come, I'll deal with it." Kaelar stared, his brain short-circuiting. Deal with it? This guy was either a genius or a total moron, and Kaelar was betting on the latter. He'd studied predators like the Kraxons, fast, brutal, built to kill. Daniel didn't stand a chance, and that smug attitude was starting to feel personal. Torvak caught the exchange, his sharp eyes locking onto Daniel. "You've got experience, human?" he asked, sizing him up. Daniel shifted his backpack, shrugging. "Some. Mostly military stuff, but it translates." Torvak grunted, a sound that could have been approval or just air. "Good. Use it. This team's counting on you all." He turned away, barking orders at the others, but Kaelar wasn't done. He stepped closer to Daniel, voice dropping to a growl. "You're gonna get us killed with that attitude." Daniel met his glare, unfazed. "Or I'll keep us alive." "Relax, Kaelar, you're overthinking this." That was the last straw. Kaelar spun on his heel, storming off to double-check the perimeter sensors. He didn't know what pissed him off more, Daniel's confidence or the fact that, deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling the human might actually pull it off. Night hit Zoran 9 hard, the sky turning pitch black except for the creepy red glow of the 2 moons hanging low. The camp was dead quiet, just the wind whining through the rocks like a warning nobody caught. Kaelar sat by the fake fire pit, his 6 arms crossed tight to fight off the cold that was creeping into his bones. He kept sneaking looks at Daniel, who was sprawled out nearby, munching on a ration bar like they were at a sleepover. "You don't feel that vibe?" Kaelar asked, his voice shaky. "Something's off." Daniel tilted his head, chewing slow. "Yeah, it's too quiet." "That's usually bad news." Kaelar opened his mouth to argue how could this guy just sit there, but before he got a word out, a scream ripped through the air. Not human, not even close. It was a Kraxon, and it wasn't alone. A pack of them burst out of the shadows, huge, skinny things with muscles like steel cables, teeth sticking out like broken glass, and eyes glowing red like they were lit from inside. They hit the camp like a truck, smashing through the sensor fence before anyone could blink. The place went nuts. Students bolted, yelling their heads off. Torvak yanked out his plasma sword, the blade humming blue, but a Kraxon slammed into him, knocking him flat. Blood sprayed across the sand, dark and wet under the moons. Kaelar froze, his 6 arms shaking so bad he couldn't move. He saw a Thalary kid, Vex, trapped under a pile of busted gear, screaming as a Kraxon stalked closer, its jaws dripping. Kaelar's brain locked up. He knew he should do something, but his legs wouldn't budge. Then Daniel was there. No fancy gear, just his beat-up kinetic pistol. He didn't run away or hide, he charged the damn thing. He swung the gun's butt hard, cracking it against the Kraxon's skull. The beast stumbled, pissed off, and spun around, sinking its teeth into Daniel's leg. Blood shot out, soaking the sand red, and Kaelar sucked in a breath. That was it, game over. But Daniel didn't drop. He roared, a sound that didn't even sound human, and jammed his pistol into the thing's throat, firing 3 shots. Bang, bang, bang. The Kraxon choked, blood bubbling out, and collapsed in a heap. Kaelar snapped out of it, yelling over the chaos. "You're crazy. Stop it, you idiot." Daniel shot him a look, eyes hard as steel. "Stay back, Kaelar. I got this." That tone, calm, cold, like he wasn't bleeding out, made Kaelar's blood boil. "Got this?" he shouted back. "You're half dead already." Daniel didn't answer, just limped forward, dragging his torn-up leg like it was nothing. Another Kraxon lunged, claws out, and Daniel ducked, barely firing into its side. The shots didn't kill it, but the beast staggered, giving him room to swing again. The camp was a mess now. Torvak was back on his feet, swinging his sword and shouting orders nobody heard. A couple of students huddled behind a crate, crying, while the Kraxons tore through anything in their way. Kaelar watched Daniel take on another one, this time slamming his shoulder into it to knock it off Vex. The kid scrambled free, but the Kraxon's claws raked Daniel's arm, ripping deep. More blood hit the sand, and Kaelar yelled again. "You're gonna die. Quit it." Daniel didn't even flinch. He gritted his teeth, pulled his knife from his belt, and stabbed the Kraxon in the neck. It screeched, thrashing, but he twisted the blade until it went limp. He stood there, breathing hard, blood dripping from his leg and arm, staring down the next one like he dared it to try him. Kaelar couldn't process it. He'd studied this stuff. Humans didn't have the stats for this. One bite like that should have sent Daniel into shock, knocked him out cold. But there he was, still moving, still fighting, like he didn't know he was supposed to be dead. "Get out of there!" Kaelar screamed, his voice cracking. Daniel turned his head just enough to smirk. "Not yet." Then he limped toward the biggest Kraxon yet, a monster twice his size, and Kaelar's stomach dropped. This wasn't bravery, this was suicide, and he couldn't tell if he was mad at Daniel or scared for him. The camp was a war zone now, a mess of screams, blood, and sand flying everywhere. Daniel's gunshots cracked through the air, mixing with the Kraxon's guttural roars and the electric buzz of Torvak's plasma sword. The instructor was back in the fight, limping but swinging, his shoulder leaking red down his arm. Another student, Lyra, got pinned under a toppled supply crate, her panic yells cutting through the chaos as a Kraxon barreled toward her. Its teeth gleamed, ready to chomp, and Kaelar just stood there, 6 arms locked up, watching it happen. Daniel didn't freeze. He bolted, leg dragging, blood trailing, and slammed his whole body into the Kraxon like a linebacker. The beast staggered, caught off guard, and Lyra scrambled out from under the crate, sobbing as she ran. But the Kraxon wasn't done. It spun, claws slashing, and caught Daniel across the chest. The sound was wet and ugly, flesh tearing open, and blood sprayed like a busted pipe. Kaelar flinched, sure that was it. Nobody walked away from a hit like that. But Daniel stumbled, caught himself, and yanked his knife free, driving it into the thing's eye socket. The Kraxon shrieked, flailing, and he yanked the blade out, letting it drop dead at his feet. Kaelar snapped. He stormed over, sand kicking up under his feet, and got in Daniel's face. "What the hell's wrong with you? You're gonna die out here, and you'll take us all down with you." His voice was raw, almost pleading, but Daniel just stared back, breathing hard, blood dripping from his chest and soaking his torn-up fatigues. "Somebody's gotta do it," he said, cold as ice. "You gonna step up, or just keep yelling?" That hit Kaelar like a punch. He grabbed Daniel's arm, trying to drag him back. "Look at yourself, you're a damn mess. This isn't a game." Daniel jerked free, wincing as more blood oozed out, and fixed Kaelar with a look that could have frozen fire. "Back off, Kaelar. I'm not done." Torvak's voice cut through from across the camp, hoarse and urgent. "Fall back. Rescue's on the way, move it." The other students started scrambling toward the transport wreck, but Daniel shook his head, planting his feet. "No. I'm holding them here." Kaelar lost it. "You're insane. You're not a hero, you're a dead man walking, and you're screwing us all." His 6 hands balled into fists, trembling with rage and fear. Daniel's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping low and rough. "Run if you want. I don't need a babysitter." It wasn't just defiance, it was a dare, and it stung worse than anything. Kaelar stepped back, chest heaving, as Daniel turned toward the biggest Kraxon yet. This one was a nightmare twice his size, fangs like machetes, eyes burning red. It growled, low and mean, and charged. Daniel didn't hesitate. He lunged, knife in one hand, pistol in the other, even as his leg buckled under him. The Kraxon swiped, claws ripping into his shoulder, and blood flew again, splattering the sand in dark streaks. Kaelar yelled something he didn't even know what, but Daniel didn't stop. He roared, shoving the knife into the beast's throat and firing point blank into its chest. The shots echoed, loud and sharp, and the Kraxon thrashed, trying to shake him off. Daniel held on, twisting the blade deeper until the thing let out a choked scream and crashed down, dead. He stood there, swaying like a drunk, blood pooling under him. His chest was shredded, his shoulder a mangled mess, and that leg was barely attached. Kaelar couldn't move, couldn't think. Humans didn't do this, they didn't take hits like that and keep going. He'd seen the charts, blood loss, shock, trauma. Daniel should have been out cold 10 minutes ago. But there he was, glaring at the darkness like he was ready for round 2. "You're nuts," Kaelar muttered, barely loud enough to hear. Daniel glanced over, smirking through the pain. "Not yet." The air shifted, another growl rumbled, but fainter. The Kraxons were still out there, circling, and Kaelar's gut twisted. He wanted to drag Daniel away, knock some sense into him, but that look in the human's eyes stopped him cold. This wasn't just stubborn, this was something else, something Kaelar didn't get and didn't want to. The fight was over, but the camp looked like a bomb went off, crates smashed, sand stained red, and the air thick with that metallic tang of blood. The Kraxons weren't charging anymore. Their growls faded into the dark, and Kaelar caught a glimpse of those red eyes flickering between the rocks before they bolted. They were running, actually running from the mess of a human standing in the middle of it all. Daniel was still on his feet, barely, his knife dripping black Kraxon blood, his chest and shoulder torn open like a horror flick. He looked like he'd been through a meat grinder, but his eyes were locked on the shadows, daring anything else to try him. Kaelar couldn't move at first, his 6 arms hanging limp. He'd never seen anything back off like that, not predators built to kill. He stepped forward, sand crunching under his boots, as Daniel's legs finally gave out. The human hit the ground hard, knife slipping from his hand, blood pooling fast under him. Kaelar rushed over, dropping to his knees. Why'd you do that? His voice came out quiet, almost lost in the wind. Daniel's head lolled to the side, his breathing shallow and ragged. Had to, he rasped, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Torvak limped up, his plasma sword still humming faintly, blood caked on his arm. He knelt next to Daniel, staring at him like he was some kind of puzzle. You held them off, kid. Saved us all. Rest now, you earned it. His voice was gruff, but there was something heavy in it, respect maybe. Kaelar didn't get it. He looked at Daniel's wrecked body, chest slashed open, shoulder a mess of meat and bone, leg barely hanging on. Blood was everywhere, soaking through his fatigues, clotting in dark clumps. This wasn't survival, this was impossible. You should be dead, Kaelar muttered, half to himself. Daniel's lips twitched, a ghost of that stupid smirk. Guess I'm stubborn. Then his eyes rolled back, and he went limp, out cold. Kaelar's hands shook as he grabbed Daniel's arm, trying to figure out what the hell he was even looking at. He'd studied biology. Humans didn't have the juice for this. Blood loss like that? Shock should have kicked in ages ago. Pain alone should have dropped him. But Daniel kept going, kept fighting, like his body didn't know when to quit. Medics from the team swarmed in, shoving Kaelar aside. They slapped emergency patches on Daniel's wounds, pumping him with fluids through a tube in his arm. He's stable for now, one of them barked, voice tight. No clue how he's still breathing. Kaelar stood back, watching them work, his brain spinning. He'd always pegged humans as fragile soft skin, weak bones, no natural weapons. They were supposed to break easy, die fast. But Daniel just rewrote the book, and it pissed Kaelar off as much as it freaked him out. He replayed it in his head, Daniel charging the Kraxons, taking hits that'd kill anything else, standing there bleeding out and still swinging. The guy didn't just survive, he made those monsters run. Kaelar's chest tightened. He'd been wrong, dead wrong, and it stung. But he couldn't shake the anger either. Daniel's cocky attitude, that reckless streak, it still grated on him. You're a lunatic, he whispered, glaring at the unconscious human. Who does that? Torvak clapped a heavy hand on Kaelar's shoulder, nearly knocking him over. He's not like us, the instructor said, low and steady. Humans got something weird in them, grit, maybe. Don't see it till it's too late. Kaelar shrugged him off, not ready to buy it. Grit? That wasn't science. That wasn't in the data. He'd spent years breaking down species by stats: speed, strength, endurance. Humans didn't rank. Yet here was Daniel, bleeding out and still the last one standing. Kaelar stepped away, fists clenched. He didn't want to admit it, but something was shifting. Daniel wasn't just some fluke, he was proof humans weren't the pushovers Kaelar thought. They didn't have claws or armor, but they had, whatever this was. Willpower? Insanity? He didn't know, and that bugged him more than anything. The medics hauled Daniel onto a stretcher, his face slack but somehow still defiant, like even passed out he was daring the world to finish him off. Kaelar watched them go, stuck between awe and a nagging itch he couldn't scratch. Whatever humans were, they weren't weak, and he hated that he hadn't seen it coming. The rescue team rolled in at dawn, engines roaring as they touched down in the wreck camp. Medics hauled Daniel into a portable med pod, sealing him in a glass tank hooked up to tubes and beeping machines. The head doc, a wiry guy with too many eyes, shook his head as he checked the readings. He's alive barely. No idea how. Should have bled out hours ago. They carted him off to a temp med station a few miles out, leaving Kaelar and the others to limp after them. The whole way, Kaelar couldn't stop staring at that pod, Daniel's pale face floating behind the glass like a ghost who wouldn't quit. At the station, they patched everyone up. Torvak's shoulder got stitched, Lyra got a brace, and Kaelar just sat there, 6 arms crossed, stewing. Daniel was still out, hooked to a drip pumping red synth blood into his veins. The docs said he'd pull through, but it'd be close. Kaelar didn't get it. Nobody did. He'd seen the guy take hits that'd drop a tank, lose enough blood to fill a bucket, and somehow he was still breathing. It didn't add up, and Kaelar hated loose ends. He started digging. While the others crashed or debriefed, he hacked into the Academy's network. Easy for a Zynari with 6 hands and a grudge. Daniel's file popped up, basic at first, Earthborn, military background, decent grades. Then he hit a locked section, flag classified. Kaelar cracked it open, and his gut twisted. Daniel wasn't just some grunt. He'd been part of an Earth experiment, a crazy adrenaline boost program. They'd juiced him up, rewired his system to push past pain and injury way beyond normal. The catch? It burned him out fast. His lifespan was shot, maybe 5 years left, tops. Kaelar leaned back, staring at the screen. That's why he didn't drop. His body was rigged to keep going, even when it shouldn't. It wasn't grit or luck, it was science, human science, and it was messed up. He looked over at the medpod, Daniel's chest rising slow and steady, and felt a weird mix of relief and nausea. This wasn't some heroic superpower. It was a death sentence he'd signed up for, probably knowing the cost. Kaelar's hands clenched. He'd been wrong about humans being weak, sure, but this wasn't strength either. It was something darker, something desperate. He got up and walked out into the red haze of Zoran 9, the wind kicking sand against his suit. Torvak's words echoed. Humans had grit, but now Kaelar wasn't so sure. Was it grit if you cheated biology to get it? Was Daniel a badass or just a guy who'd traded everything to prove a point? Kaelar didn't know, and that gnawed at him. He'd spent the night thinking humans were nuts, maybe even admirable, but this twist made them scarier and sadder than he'd figured. Standing there, watching the horizon, Kaelar felt something new creep in, a prick of envy. Not for the experiment, not for the fight, but for whatever drove Daniel to say yes to that deal. To stare down death and keep swinging, even if it cost him everything. Kaelar turned back, glancing at the medpod one last time. Hero, monster, or just a guy too stubborn to lose? He couldn't pin it down. All he knew was the galaxy had no clue what it was dealing with, and neither did he. Wow, what a ride, right? Daniel Carter went from fragile human to straight-up legend, taking down Kraxons while basically dying, and that twist about the experiment? Mind-blowing. What did you think? Could you keep fighting like that, or is he just built different? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you love this story, hit that like button. It really helps us out. Don't forget to subscribe to Sci-Fi Space and tap the bell so you don't miss our next video.